Hi guys, Boat here once again, and today we're starting off my WARNO Bootcamp tutorial series. If you're new to WARNO, definitely stick around. If you're more experienced, also stick around. You might pick up something new that you didn't know about yet. So in this one, we'll go through some of the very basics of the game and how to get started. If you're new to it, you're probably wondering what the game is really about. Well, it is a real-time strategy game in which you can control single units like infantry, tanks, airplanes, helicopters, artillery, and more on massive maps on which you can battle AI or real players. WARNO is set in 1989 in a Cold War gone hot, so Cold War turned World War III scenario. One scenario I love imagining is for coffee to be cheaper, but one way you can help supply me with caffeine is by becoming a patron. That way you supply the coffee and I deliver the content. So the game is set in 1989, Cold War turned into World War III. Now who's fighting who in this conflict is basically between NATO and Warsaw. So on the NATO side we have countries like West Germany, the US, UK, France, and on the eastern side, or in Warsaw, we have the Soviet Union and East Germany. But Eugen might add more nations later on. So what can you do? Well, you can pick one of the military forces from that time and take it into battle. And these are called battle groups. You can look at battle groups as a deck of cards that you will use in your epic Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon Brawl. Each battle group will have its own strength and weaknesses, so it's good to familiarize yourself with these. You will have different types of cards, like logistics, which includes supplies that your units need. There will be infantry units, tanks, helicopters, airplanes, and so on. All of these together will make up your stack of cards that you take into battle. You can only carry so many cards though, and each card will have different costs depending on which type of battle group you go for and which type of unit you go for. The types of battle groups that exist right now are airborne, armored, and mechanized, which is more of an infantry battle group. And each has its own pros and cons. For example, when you go for an airborne battle group, the cost for adding a card of airplanes to your battle group is lower. You can get more airplanes and you can get them at a more experienced level. When you go for an armored battle group, the same is true for the cost when you want to add a card of tanks to your battle group. Now here's a little quick demonstration. So if you go into the Air tab in the US 3rd Armored, the first two cards of planes that we put in will cost me 1 activation point each. So here we have 2 Eagles, these air superiority fighters, and that only costs 1 activation point. So I still have 49 points to build my entire deck with, or entire division or battle group with. I can go for another one, which costs me only 1 activation point as well, and we've used up all the planes. Now if I want to go for another plane, that's going to cost me more. That's going to cost me 2 points, and the 4th plane is going to cost me 3 points, the 5th plane again another 3, and then the last one is also going to cost me 3 points. If I do this, I've already used up 13 of my 50 activation points, and I haven't even gotten to any of the other places yet. So that is going to cost you quite dearly. Now if we compare that to the 82nd Airborne, you can see that the first 4 planes that I put in only cost 1 activation point. So I can just fill this up without worrying too much about not having any points left. Besides cost reduction to specific types of units, you are also sacrificing other things. For example, going for an airborne battle group usually means that you will not have access to the best tanks, while an armored battle group will. But an armored battle group will have relatively weaker airplanes. But it doesn't just end there. The rest of the battle group is limited or enhanced based on what you go for in terms of specialization. To start off with, let's go to the American 3rd Armored Battle Group, since most units will be quite recognizable, and it's also pretty fun to play with. When we click on the US 3rd Armored Battle Group and click Create, we start with a fresh and empty roster. Start by clicking on the Logistics tab. In here you can find your supply units and command units. Supplies are needed to resupply and repair your units, while command units are used to capture zones on the map. On the unit card, the price of each unit is shown at the top, and during a match you will have a steady income of points, and these points can be spent on purchasing units that you put in your deck. On the right side are the unit stats. So if you want to compare units, simply click on the first unit, click on the pin button here, and hover over the second unit that you want to compare it with. For example, when we compare these two supply trucks, we can see that the second one has much more cargo space. But you do get less of this unit per card. Now Eugen will be adding a forward operating base, which is a giant supply depot that you can put on the map. And you'll be able to use this to refill your empty supply trucks or helis, but for now you will have to make do with the supplies you bring with you. So that's why I recommend at least 1 card of trucks and 1 card of supply helicopters for a more mobile and faster supply mission. Now besides that, you need a command unit. You can use these to capture zones on the map. They're also available in the infantry and tank sections as kind of leader units, and they can also capture zones, but are also fighting units if you want to use them that way. Now when you click on a unit, and this is true for every unit, all the stats will be shown on the right side. So for supplies it's quite easy. The only thing you really need to know is like speed and the amount of supplies it carries. But when you get to infantry, it gets a little bit more complicated. For each type of infantry, all the weaponry is shown on the right side. So for example, this fire team here will have M16 assault rifles, they will have the M249 light machine gun, and they will have the M72 Law anti-tank rocket launcher. Now if you compare it, for example, with the fire team AT, you can see a couple of noticeable differences. For example, the anti-tank weapon is much better when you go for the AT4 fire team because of the penetration value being higher. And penetration value is basically a value of this rocket's ability to penetrate through the tank's armor. Now speaking of infantry, here you kind of have a ton of options thrown at your face. There's infantry with flamethrowers, some have short range anti-tanks, some have long range ones, and some of them come in different types of transports. There's also different classes of infantry in WARNO in general, and to demonstrate it I will go to the French division because it kind of has all the different types of infantry in it, which are special forces, shock, military police, IFV infantry, airborne, leaders and reservists, and all these unit classes have different effects. So for example, special forces, as you might guess, will be very resilient, while IFV infantry gets a suppression reduction when their transports are near them. Lead units on the other hand are both able to capture zones on the map, but can also buff the units in its sphere of influence. And the cool thing about military police, for example, is that they help your infantry to regain from suppression, so to recover from it at a faster rate than they would usually. If you hover over the icons shown here, the game will actually give you more information regarding the unit traits and features, so that already should help you out a little bit more. One important feature with infantry and the other specialized units is the airborne trait. The cool thing about this is that the units can spawn further and thus can be at the front line much faster than regular units, so keep an eye on this when building up your selection. Again, a quick demonstration of that. We have regular infantry, such as these guys here. They can only spawn in our base spawn. But I also have units that have the airborne tag, and they can spawn much further in a zone called the forward deployment zone. So as you can see, it's kind of an area that extends outside of your base, and this way you can get to the front line much sooner. But the same is also true for recon units. Recon units can spawn further away from the base as well, in like a intermediate forward deployment. The main takeaway here is really that you should try to balance out your selection to include infantry that is good against other infantry. So infantry with flamethrowers, for example, are very, very good. You also want to, in some cases, go for infantry that is kind of relatively cheap to kind of buff up your secondary lines or your frontline infantry. So you want to go for a really balanced approach in this part. Next we have the artillery tab. Here you can decide if you want some artillery to smoke ahead of your units or use HE to suppress the enemy and so on. Luckily we are kind of limited with the artillery choices, so you can't really go wrong here, but I do always recommend bringing a couple of mortars so that you can smoke your advance or smoke your defense. Now after all that, you can go through the selection of tanks that you would like to add in your battle group. Now when we look at the M1A1 Abrams, for example, we can see that it has a value of 17 on its frontal armor and a value of 19 on its weapons or main cannon's penetration value, and you might wonder if this is actually good. Now the maximum for both in WARNO is 21, so if you compare to that, this tank isn't too bad. It's a medium to good tank to use. Now in the recon tab you can select the eyes of your army. These units have forward deployment as well and good optics, meaning they can spot enemies much easier than your regular units, and they also have a little bit of stealth. Next, the anti-air tab. Well, it is luckily quite limited here as well, but it makes it better to understand its mechanisms. In this game, AA can be both radar guided or not radar guided. If you see this radar icon, it means that this AA piece uses radar to spot and target enemy aircraft, but this also means that it can be targeted by enemy seed planes, which detects radar guided anti-air and fires a missile at it. In general, radar AA is more accurate, but there's a downside of it being detectable to seed planes. I will have another video in which I will dive into micro units, but for now remember that radar AA can be vulnerable if not turned off when not in need. Other than that, there's manpads or man-portable anti-air defense systems, which are soldiers with a shoulder-launched anti-air missile. Now in WARNO, I recommend going for a mixture of missile and gun AA units. Next, we have the helicopters, and obviously Apaches will be your go-to when you open this tab, but one thing to remember is that planes can take out helicopters quite easily in this game, and usually within one gun run, so you need to be careful with your helicopter. There's various types of helicopters. Some only have anti-tank weapons, some have both anti-tank and rockets, some only have rockets. So it fully depends on what you want your helicopters to do on the battlefield. If you want them only to support your infantry, you don't really care about taking out tanks, you can go for the rocket versions of the Apache, and this will save you quite a lot of points. If you only want to have your Apache destroy tanks, maybe going for the ATGM variant is the better choice. Now let's go to the Airplanes tab. Here you have many choices. You will have specialized fighters, such as the Eagle. There will be napalm bombers, high explosive bombers, A-10s with rockets, and also the seaplane that we discussed earlier, which works great at taking out enemy radar area. One thing I haven't talked about is the veterancy of units. If you go for a higher veterancy, your units are slightly buffed with a higher accuracy on the weapons, better recovery from being stressed, but these percentages are a percentual increase of your base values. So if the missile of your seaplane has a base accuracy of 65, it goes up to 68 when you go for a higher veterancy, which gives you about a 5% boost in accuracy. Another important stat on airplanes are shown here at the bottom right. The speed and agility is vital if you're going for a dogfighter, but the ECM value is also very important. ECM, or electronic countermeasures, are a way for your airplanes to fight against incoming missiles, and basically reduces the likelihood of an incoming missile hitting you. Other than that, sometimes a slower airplane is actually better if you want to take out a large convoy of units or helicopters, such as the case with the A-10. This is by far my favorite unit, and it's just wonderful at doing just that. And it's a great way to punish the enemy for lacking AA at the start of a match. Now, one thing I'm lacking once again is coffee. I have a coffee cup in my hand right now, there's not enough beans in it, so if you want to support me and be my bean supplier, please do check out Patreon. You can do so for $1 a month, and in this way, you support content and you keep the flow of coffee going, and I keep the flow of content going for you. Now for episode 2 of the Bootcamp series, I will actually build a third armored battle group from the ground up and give you all of my thoughts and reasonings behind all my choices. And if you want to build your own battle group and have me review it, you can do so by joining the Discord. There's a WARNO deck or WARNO battle group chat, and people here are basically posting their divisions or battle groups, and everyone else can comment on it and give their thoughts and probably also some prayers on it, and that way everyone can kind of just help each other out at being better at the game.